Yeah, the Parks and Wildlife just
I
has
hope not.
the Joseph Carter clause.
So that actually is a great segue to why would they want to do that? Because from what I understand, with you do a lot of work for the Parks and Wildlife Services with the muskrat control, and is that correct?
Yeah. So at this point, I'm in really good standing because I am doing a service. But you have to realize that people in power, it doesn't really have to do with logic.
Got it.
There's a lot of really wait, why is that a law? Well, because like the squirrel example, there are multiple states in this country where it's more complicated to own a squirrel or a bunny that runs around in your backyard than it is a lion or a tiger or a freaking baboon, because one's native and one's not.
I think we all found that out at the very beginning of the pandemic, how easy it was to get a tiger and how irresponsible people are that own them.
Tiger King.
Yeah. Yep. So
that came out of nowhere.
Those guys are like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, we haven't written a law about a tiger, but don't you touch that squirrel. Oh, unless you want to kill it. Oh, sure, go ahead and kill it. Don't touch it alive. Wait, what?
Yeah, that's gonna be difficult.
Well, I think somebody was saying that there's more captive tigers in Texas, where we're from, than there are wild tigers in the world.
Yeah.
Which just kind of goes to your point. Yeah. So we've talked about acquiring exotic animals. How is it that you acquire mink? Because I've been through the book and I've got some questions about it in a minute, but how do you get your hands on mink? Because I can just go to the pet store and get a ferret. I cannot go to the pet store and get this tiny little ball of hate that you take and hunt rats with.
Yeah, it used to be very complicated, but unfortunately, I've kind of changed that unintentionally. So because of my following and people being interested in them now, they have started to pop up in the exotic pet world, which is very unfortunate because they're very, very inappropriate pets for the overwhelming majority of people. And these exotic pet people, I'm painting a wide brush. They're not all like that, but generally speaking, they don't really, they have a limited amount, I should say, of care for their purchasers or the animals they're selling most of the time, at least the ones I've run into. And no offense to the people who aren't like that, but it's kind of a stereotype. The exotic pet world, they just, hey, throw me cash and I'll throw you the animal, kind of like you're talking about with the tigers.
Yeah.
And, with a tiger, that's a big obvious, oh my gosh. With mink, it's not so obvious, but they can cause some serious harm. Sure, they're probably not going to kill you, but, they could cause, some pain. And if it was a small child, maybe even permanent scars. And the animal, of course, is going to get the short end of that stick. They're just going to get put down or dumped,
Yeah, because it's one thing to own an exotic snake that you have to feed once every 2 weeks or once a month, and that it just stays in the cage and doesn't do anything. But a mink it's an active animal.
It's a high energy mammal.
Yeah, it wants to be. It wants to work. It wants to go hunt. It, for lack of a better way to put it, it's got its own personality and things like that are unique to that animal. And so those mammals in particular seem like they would fall on a much more high maintenance end of the exotic spectrum. And I know there have been enough stories, especially coming out of Florida lately, about Burmese pythons and things like that being found just released in people's yards because they didn't realize how big it was going to get, and it was cute at a reptile show. Well, letting a mink go in a neighborhood could, you could end up with a bunch of chihuahuas that are missing.
Yeah, it's something that I'm not. I wish I could have prevented, but there's no real. I mean, how do you prevent that other than just hiding under a rock and not telling people what I do?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which I could have done. I guess that was an option, right? But
yeah, but that's nowhere near as cool.
So how many mink do you have right now?
So I have 12 adults, and then their offspring, 22.
Okay.
And how many what's the word here? When you have a litter, how many typically are in a litter?
Oh, like 4 to 8 is pretty normal.
What's the word for a baby mink?
I call them kits.
Okay, there's a word in this book that starts with a W that for there you go. What in the world?
Wait, what was that?
Wanagthe. So I created kind of a few words that in the English vocabulary there wasn't really a word for. So in falconry, and I kind of got this from my falconry background. Probably if I wouldn't have jumped to this if I wasn't into falconry. But horses same way. Horses have their own, horse people have their own dialect and word. You got foal and colt and filly and mare and stud and or stallion and gelding. And if you're into horses, every single one of those words and what they mean. But if you haven't been around horses, you're like, wait, what? Like some of those words are probably familiar, like stallion or filly. But the rest,
if it ends with cheesesteak, I know what that is.
So, horse. I'm into horses, or was into horses growing up. My grandfather was a horse trainer, so I'm used to horse lingo, falconry lingo. I kind of created some words for Minkenry. Now, I didn't do this like crazy. Falconry's got a lot of terminology that's ridiculous. It's like, dude, why do you need a specific term for that one specific thing? Like, just call it what it is. It's a strap. Oh no, it's a Jesse. Okay. That's a Buick. And that's I can go off with a whole bunch of terminology in falconry. Falconry kind of seems like they're making up words just for the fun of making up words. Like, of course they're not making up. These words are like thousands of years old a lot of times. But they're using these ancient words, and it's like, dude, like you don't need that much vocabulary. It's sometimes you swear they're just making up words to make up words, right? Yeah. In the mink sense, I didn't do that intentionally. So I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to make this really hip, man, and come up with these cool words. No, I was just like, dude, we don't have a word for it. We got to call it something. Okay, I'll just come up with a couple of words. So Wanagthe is one of those words. And what I used Omaha because it's a language that, people don't really use. So I could just basically describe what I'm trying to say in another language and use that as the term, if that makes sense.
And Omaha is a Native American language, correct?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
What tribe is that from?
Omaha.
Okay, so that's the tribe name also. Cool.
Yeah. It's not just what Peyton Manning yelled whenever the linebackers were coming at him.
Is that true?
Yeah. Omaha was a famous audible that Peyton Manning used, and that's where it comes from. Is that?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've got a background in falconry. So I've got a kind of a couple questions with that. We'll start with, how did you transition from training horses, or at least being around horses that were being training falcons, and then mink? Like what was the jump between falconry to mink? How did you get introduced to minks, I guess, is my ultimate question.
So my family, my immediate family, parents and siblings, are not really into animals, especially my father, not at all. And most of my siblings, not at all, not even a little bit. And so I'm kind of the weird one of the family, because I'm obviously totally, completely, and utterly obsessed about animals from day one. I mean, we're talking about as soon as I could like walk around and converse, that's all I wanted to talk about. I was that weird kid that knew really big words he shouldn't know. Nocturnal means they come out at night. And it's like, dude, how do you say that word? Like one of those little nerdy kids that say really big words. Yeah. That was me, except they were animal nerdy. It wasn't, Star Wars or math. Or
yeah, you were saying indigenous, and everybody else was trying to say lightsaber.
Yeah.
If you got hurt, you'd said it was your thorax.
Yeah, so
insect terminology.
They're all animal related words and things. So I was obsessed with animals from a really young age. My dad is absolutely not. He's a doctor of material science. So he's into like not animals or outdoors at all. So it was really hard for him and my weird obsession, because I didn't just like animals. I like wild animals. So for a funny little example, I remember at one point in my life, I don't know, I was like 8 or something. This lady asked me, why do you want a wild mouse? Why don't you just get one from the pet store? And I stopped and I was like, I don't have an answer for that. Why don't I just get one from the pet store? It's just not interesting to me. I want a wild mouse. Mm-hmm. And so, even though there's a exact same species, is a lot easier to work with, even comes in cool little colors. Why do you want the wild one? I don't know. So that was very difficult for my father, who didn't really understand domestic animals, let alone wild ones. And so we kind of butted heads. I'm really, really headstrong, stubborn little guy. And so we butted heads pretty hard. By the time I was 15, it just wasn't working out. So they sent me to live with my grandfather, who was a horse trainer. So previous to that, they were sending me like in the summer. So they'd send me out to live with him. Like as soon as school was over, I'd leave. And as soon as school started, I'd come back. And I did that for a number of years until finally it was just like, hey, let's just stop taking him back. Let's just leave him out there. He's driving us nuts and he's doing way better out there than he is at home. Let's just leave him out there. So, and I wasn't, I was happy with that. So my grandfather, being a horse trainer, obviously he didn't live in the city, and I had a lot more leeway. I could have a dog for the first time in my life. See, that's how restrictive I was. I'd never even had a dog until I moved out of the house. I mean, forget the crazy wild crap I wanted to have. I never even had a dog until I moved out of the house.
Yeah, so very strict, no animals.
Yeah. And it wasn't no animals, because that didn't fly. It was hidden animals, stuff I could barely get by. And my dad find like skunks under the back porch in a cage, or a snapping turtle hidden under my bed. Like I had crazy crap. I just had to keep it under wraps.
You're sounding more and more like Ace Ventura. you know when he jiggles the handle of the door and then all the animals hide and he comes out and says, "Come out!" and there's penguins and all kinds of animals coming out of hiding. That sounds like your room.
I had some interesting. I had interesting stuff, but I had to hide most of it. And there was stuff he'd let me keep. It wasn't like I couldn't have anything. But I mean, even something as basic as a dog, I never got to have. Which is funny because after I left the house, they got a dog. But I couldn't have a dog. Anyway, so when I moved out at age 15, I lived with my grandfather as a horse trainer. I was already used to that lifestyle because I was there for several months out of the year, most years. And so I got a dog. I got into falconry. I just kind of like jumped in head first because my grandpa was like, "You want a grizzly bear? Okay. Chain it up out back. Don't let it kill the horses." That was a joke, of course.
Right. Yeah.
That's how, like, whatever he was with me, which, was breath of fresh air. So I jumped into falconry, which I'd been interested in for a long time and studied for a long time, but never could do because of my living arrangements. So at my grandfather's, boom, I got into falconry, flew birds for a number of years. I, of course, trained horses all day long. That's what I did with my grandfather, trained cattle, dogs, and horses, and flew birds of prey. So my grandfather was a little bit kind of a migrant. Like, he'd go live in one location and train horses there, and then he'd move and live in another location and train horses there. And so we moved around quite a bit. And we ended up, one of our places when I was a senior in high school was near a mink farm in Utah. And so I was like, what's a mink? Like, I knew the basics. I knew they were a member of the weasel family, but that was kind of it. Like, I didn't know they were semi-aquatic. I didn't know where they were from. I didn't know anything. So I'm like, what's a mink? And of course, people responded, and they were around mink farms, so they were very familiar with mink getting out and getting in their backyards or their garage or whatever. And they're like, "Oh, they're the most vicious, horrible creatures alive, man. They'll kill your dogs and kill your cats and attack you for no reason. And they're just horrible." And some of the stories were, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. That's what mink do." But some of them were really like a stretch. It was like, "They killed my pigs." It's like, they killed your pigs.